I'm going to take a look at some of my records from last year and kind of go through them with you and kind of see how things worked last year. This dark means that these hives were not active at that point, so I don't have any data for them. The blue indicates that there was a treatment that may have affected the mite count following it, and that happens throughout here. The green is our mite count, or our treatment. This is when the oil was changed, and this is when the actual count occurred. And then alcohol washes are this lighter yellow. Red is when the mite drop is over 10 per day, and that to me is usually very close to a threshold. So let's take a look through here. So in very early January of last year, we had 0 mites. We had 2 and 4 for the highest. And one of our hives had a lot of small hive beetles in it. It had 18, and the rest were 0, 1s, 3s. I'll discuss the small hive beetles at the end, just for reference. All right, so about a month later in February, and there was no treatment before this, so this is all natural mite drop. We had 1s and 0s. That's great. And that is total, so the per hour was 0.3 and under. So that's really good. Another month later, in March, we had everything. The highest we had was a 6 and a 4, so 2 per day, which is great and still under the threshold. So about a month and a half later, I guess I did not do it early April. I had a lot of swarms. Well, it wasn't really swarms. I was splitting a lot to help control swarms, so I didn't have a chance to change the oil. And on April 21st, I went ahead and did OA on our hive 5 and 7. And 6 days later, I went ahead and did all the hives except for hive 1. So these mite counts are affected by the OA. So our daily totals were 3.3, 9, 11.7. So anything over 10 is a trigger for me to begin treating. And anything at the solid bottom board, it was active, but I was not able to count the drops. And I'll also note here that this is our treatment cycle. So some of these got 2, some of these got 1, but what ended up happening is that was the overall treatment cycle. So this one actually ended up getting treated 4 times, this one 3, and the rest of these a minimum of 3 times. So that was from 21, 27, 24th, 12th, and the 19th. And that was all oxalic acid vaporization. And then a couple weeks, well, about a week after that, cleaned the oil. So this should be a natural drop. And we had 1s, 2s, a 7, 2, 3, 5, 0s, and a 9. So that divided out, the highest we had was a 3 per day. So for me, everything seemed to be good up through May. And then we did some alcohol washes just to confirm, and this would have been the following month. I tried to get them all, but I had to do some on the 8th, some on the 9th, and then a couple of weeks later, I was able to get the rest of them. So this is the totals for all the hives. It's just spread out on the date they were actually done. So the highest we had was 2, and that has solid bottom board, so I don't have any data to connect that to. But this one that was a little bit higher was just a 1. So slide over a little bit. In June, beginning of July, so this last mite wash was pretty close to this. So the 0 on the mite wash was less than 1 drop per day. The highest we had was a 5.5. Well, we had a 9, some 5s. But this 5 is a 1. That was a 0. This relates to a 1. And this relates to a 5. So, I mean, the highest one we had was 9, and it was a 1 wash a month ago. So, keep track of that. And another month later, there was no treatment, so these are natural mite drops again. We had one that was 9.3. Again, this is a solid bottom board. It's under threshold, probably still is at this point. And then we had 27 in this one, which was a 0 about 2 months prior. It was a 5.9 the month prior, so it jumped up to 27. So this one may have either robbed or something something happened there where their numbers jumped up to above 10 a day. 10 a day is kind of the trigger for me to do some sort of treatment. And this being in August, the supers were still on, so my only choice was oxalic acid vaporization. This one had 61 per day, and then previous to that, it had 9, and then previous to that was an alcohol wash of 1. Let's go back just a little further there. There we go. And then a 12, which was previous month was 5, and that was equating to about a 1 on an alcohol wash. So I did a oxalic acid vaporization the next day, and I went ahead and changed the oil that day and then checked 3 days later, and these were the numbers. Again, these were affected by the OAV drop, so these are going to be a little bit higher. So we had 11, 18, 21, 95, one that was already up 172. So that made me follow up that with 2 more rounds of oxalic acid vaporization. And this one I just did because it was so high, and the number was even higher the next time to 330. And then another oxalic acid vaporization. And then I waited a couple weeks to, I was hoping that it was cleaned up. And that 11 washed as a 0, the 95 washed as a 6, which is a 2% threshold. That time of year is about 3%, but some people like to be down closer to 2%. 2% would be 6, so you would potentially treat at that point. And then the one that was 172, and again, previous to that was 61, which is too high in my book, was 8. 8 would be under the threshold if you're using a 3%. So that's just something to think about there. There's a lot of mites in there, even at 3% infestation. So the following day, I cleaned the bottom board oil to do a check so I can compare these numbers. And this was a 0.3, and this was 14.3, which to me is over my limit, which is pretty close to what we had there. And then 8, and this is just exponentially larger. It's 135 drop per day. So that's a lot. So just looking at this, I did 3 treatments in August. Going back, it was 61, and those numbers went up. This one was 27. Those numbers went down a little bit, but still not low enough. And this was 9.3 to 10.7. So a treatment of OAV in August is not effective because there's just too much brood, at least in our area. That's what I'm seeing with these numbers. Slide over a little bit more. Once we had these numbers, we treated the high numbers again with 1 more round, just to make this a 4-round total. And this one that was high, we went ahead and doubled the dose up to 6 grams of oxalic acid, which is 3 per deep. Let's see, and this one was a little high, so I went ahead and hit that one as well. And then I did 3 more additional rounds beyond that first round on this high because it was so high. And this was replaced on the 21st and checked on the 28th. So there would be, okay, let me back up. This doesn't affect the counts because these were not treated within a week. But this was 1.1 and 6.1, so this was a little high for me. And then the end of September into October, this is a natural drop, and we had a 10.3, 31, and 140.7. So I did an alcohol wash the next day to check these 2 that were higher. 10 probably should have been treated, but it was so close that I don't want to treat if the bees can survive with the mites. So 31 and 140, that triggered me to do something more than oxalic acid because I did so much of it the previous months. So I went ahead and did Apiguard in those 2 hives. The alcohol wash, again, this was 6, and this one turned out to be 22, whereas the alcohol wash that was done about a month previous was a 6, stayed the same even through all that oxalic acid, And then this one went from 8 up to 22, even with the double dose of all the oxalic acid. So again, the oxalic acid vaporization for us in September is not very effective. I think the Apigard should have been put on then in September, not in October. But the bees are still surviving, which is fine, which means our treatment window is probably September through October to be safe. But that may not be true where you live. October may not even be possible where you live. So we put these treatments on. It was actually 4 treatments. This is the treatment cycle. It was actually 4, but I did change the oil and did a bottom board count on the 25th. Again, the only ones that are affected are the ones that had Apigard, and this was 35, and this one was 9.7. So even with the Apigard, this one was below what I feel is my threshold, which is close to the threshold when you do an alcohol wash. So that to me is very effective. But we did have one that was 26.2, so this one went from the beginning of the month to just a few weeks later, went up to 26. It more than doubled the drop per day. This one kind of stayed about the same, but again, this one was affected by that last treatment, and this was a natural drop. So I really think that had a lot more time for the Apigard to actually do some of the killing and not just them falling off. And then 140 went down to 9.7, which is, to me, is showing that's very effective. And then this one was 26.3. The last time we saw that, it was 9.6 or 6.1. And it hadn't been treated in between there. So that one jumped up in October. And this one actually is sitting next to one of the hives that was being treated with Apigard. So this could have been some drift that happened right here. All right, and let's slide a little further. So when the Apigard was done in October, with Apigard, actually the last dose of Apigard, I went ahead and did oxalic acid in this hive that was higher that did not get Apigard, and then also this hive that was higher that didn't get Apigard. And then the following week, I hit most of the hives. This had been long enough that the Apigard was out of the hive, so there wasn't any detrimental effect. Hive 6, not sure why I didn't do 6 or 4. It may have been because of the insulation was inconvenient, and hive 1 also didn't get done. But then overall, you can see this one had 4 in a row, this one had 2, this one had 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, throughout that cycle. So that got us to November 17th. Then a couple weeks later, in December, these are all natural mite drops. We had 0s, 1s, 0s, and 1s. We had a 7. So this 7 was because I put this in a poly hive, and I couldn't treat it. So that's why I had dashes in here. And then in the videos that you saw, I figured out how to do treatment in the top. So I was able to hit that one again. And I went ahead in December and treated all the hives with 6 grams per hive. And I did those 3 times in a row, with the last one ending on the solstice, which is typically the time of year that the hives have the least amount of brood. So, and then I checked again on the 3rd, and the mites were down to 0s and 1s. It's in pretty good shape. So again, these were 1s total, but the per hour or per 24 hours, 0.2. So that's pretty much where we want to be this time of year. You want them as clean as possible, and then you kind of start the cycle all over again. So it looks like we didn't have to treat until April. This was the end of April, and it was effective. So April through May, that will help us get our numbers down. And then it looks like everything starts jumping up again once we get to August, and then September. So August through September, beginning of September is when our mite counts get to the point where I flag them as dark red. They're pretty high. Now, we don't have small hive beetle issues where we lose hives, but anything above 50 I've tagged with this light red, just to show that in July is really when the heaviest pressures arrive. So July, it's interesting, in August, nothing was above 50. We just had one that was above 50, which is kind of odd. And then August, let's see, this is August. This is just a little bit after this one. Checking again. So there's 72 that were dead in there, and then there's another 131 that were dead in there. Sometimes these OAV treatments do aggravate the small hive beetles, and then the bees can get to them and take care of them too. So after that, we only had one more that peaked, and it was in mid-August. And then after that, our numbers were below 50. So June, July, and August are our small hive beetle months. And we did start using GrubX this year, and that seemed to be somewhat effective for us. And I think we will continue using that.